Brielle Montgomery, 28, never imagined that a single Instagram post would shatter the fragile peace she'd built after years of family estrangement. As she stared at her phone, watching the notification count explode, she knew the carefully constructed walls between her present success and her painful past had just collapsed. The parents who had once told her she was throwing her life away for pursuing her dreams were now frantically calling their sudden interest arriving 3 years too late, right after her company's $50 million valuation hit the headlines. Before I dive into how my parents' rejection turned into the most satisfying karma story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy family drama with a side of sweet revenge. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how the people who once abandoned me for dreaming too big came crawling back when those dreams actually came true. Growing up in Millfield, Ohio, Brielle had always felt like a misfit in her own family. The Montgomerys were practical people with modest ambitions. Her father Richard worked as a shift manager at the local manufacturing plant for 30 years, while her mother Eleanor taught 3rd grade at Millfield Elementary. They lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house Richard's parents had owned, drove sensible cars that lasted a decade, and took vacations to the same lakeside cabin every summer. Theirs was a life of comfortable predictability where security was valued above all else. Brielle, however, was cut from a different cloth. Even as a child, she showed an entrepreneurial streak that baffled her parents. At age 8, she set up a neighborhood newsletter that she sold for 50 cents per copy, recruiting neighbor kids as reporters to gather local stories. By 12, she had graduated to a lawn mowing and snow shoveling business, saving every dollar in a special account she called her Future Empire Fund. While her parents initially found these ventures cute, their amusement turned to concern as Brielle's ambitions grew more serious. High school only widened the gap between Brielle and her family. While her younger brother Todd followed their father's footsteps, playing football, taking vocational classes, and talking about joining the military or getting a solid union job, Brielle was starting an online custom t-shirt business from her bedroom, staying up late to learn coding and talking about moving to New York or San Francisco after graduation. Her business classes became her obsession, and she grew distant from family dinners and weekend activities. "Honey, these big dreams are setting you up for disappointment," her mother would say, shaking her head as Brielle excitedly explained her latest business idea. "There's nothing wrong with a normal, stable life right here." Her father was more blunt. "The world isn't waiting to hand success to every kid with a scheme he'd lecture. People from Millfield don't become millionaires. That's Hollywood fantasy." Their disapproval crystallized during Brielle's senior year when college applications began. The Montgomerys had always assumed both their children would attend the state university 40 minutes away where tuition was affordable, and many Millfield graduates went. They had modestly saved for this practical path. But Brielle had secretly applied to business programs at elite schools across the country, including Wharton, NYU, and Stanford. The tension exploded one March evening when an overnight package arrived from Stanford University. Eleanor had opened it thinking it was a teaching resource she'd ordered, only to discover Brielle's acceptance letter to Stanford's undergraduate business program, along with a partial scholarship that still left a staggering financial gap. "What were you thinking?" Richard thundered that night, waving the acceptance packet. "Do you have any idea what this would cost? Even with this scholarship, we're talking about more than our house is worth. I've been saving since I was 12, Brielle argued, her voice shaking but determined. "And I can get loans, work part-time." "Absolutely not," Eleanor interrupted. "We're not going into debt for some fantasy. The state school has a perfectly good business program." "It's not the same, and you know it," Brielle shot back. "Stanford could change my entire future." Richard's face darkened. "That's your problem, Brielle. Always thinking you're too good for what's right in front of you. Always chasing some grand future instead of appreciating what you have. The argument raged for hours, culminating in Richard's ultimatum: "You go to state like we planned, or you're on your own. We won't support this reckless dream." That night marked the first fracture in Brielle's relationship with her parents, a crack that would eventually become an unbridgeable canyon. In her bedroom surrounded by business plans and vision boards, 18-year-old Brielle made the first truly adult decision of her life. She would go to Stanford even if it meant cutting ties with her family. The remaining months of high school passed in cold civility. Brielle worked double shifts at the local diner, applied for every scholarship she could find, and secretly consulted with Stanford's financial aid office. Her parents maintained a veneer of normalcy in public, but privately treated her decision as a betrayal. Todd, caught in the middle at 16, watched helplessly as his family splintered. On graduation day, Brielle scanned the audience during the ceremony, hope still flickering despite everything. Her row of seats reserved for the Montgomery family remained conspicuously empty. They had chosen to make their statement by absence a deliberate show of disapproval that stung worse than any argument. Only her grandmother had shown up, sitting alone with an apologetic smile, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of everyone who wasn't there. "They'll come around," her grandmother whispered, as she hugged Brielle afterward. "They're scared of losing you to a bigger world. Give them time." But time would only widen the divide, as Brielle packed her few belongings and prepared to leave for a future her family couldn't or wouldn't understand. Arriving at Stanford was like stepping onto another planet for Brielle. The palm tree-lined campus, sprawling and majestic against the California blue sky, couldn't have been more different from the practical brick buildings of Millfield High. Her dorm room in Wilbur Hall was smaller than her bedroom at home, but to Brielle it represented infinite possibility, a space entirely her own, free from disapproving glances and practical concerns. The financial reality, however, hit hard and fast. Despite her scholarship, savings, and multiple small grants, Brielle found herself working 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. Mornings began at 5 a.m. at a campus coffee shop. Weekends were spent nannying for professors' children, and evenings often found her doing data entry for the business school. Sleep became a luxury she could rarely afford, especially as coursework intensified. Those first months she called home weekly, hoping the distance might soften her parents' stance. The conversations were strained, focusing on weather and Todd's football games, carefully dancing around her Stanford experience. When she mentioned struggling financially, her father's response was swift and cutting. "You made your choice, Brielle. This is what independence looks like." The message was clear: her struggle was the natural consequence of her defiance, not something deserving of sympathy or support. By Thanksgiving, when Brielle couldn't afford the flight home, the calls became monthly, then quarterly. Christmas passed with only a card containing a $50 bill and her mother's tidy signature. No personal message, no questions about her life. It was less a gift than a statement. This token amount was all they were willing to invest in her foolish venture. Despite these hardships, Stanford proved to be the crucible Brielle needed. Her business acumen, which had seemed like youthful fantasy in Millfield, was recognized and nurtured by professors who had built and sold companies worth millions. In class discussions about market disruption and scaling strategies, her practical bootstrapping mentality stood out among peers who spoke in theoretical terms. Her entrepreneurial instincts, once dismissed at her family dinner table, earned her respect in Silicon Valley seminar rooms. During her sophomore year, Brielle met Aiden Chen in her entrepreneurial design class. Brilliant, driven, and from a family of successful Los Angeles restaurateurs, Aiden complemented Brielle's practical business sense with technical genius. When they were paired for a semester-long project developing a business concept, something clicked. Late nights in the library turned into passionate discussions over cheap ramen, about how technology could transform small businesses, the kind of mom-and-pop operations that formed the backbone of towns like Millfield. Their project, initially called Local Lift, evolved into a sophisticated platform that helped small businesses compete with corporate giants through targeted digital marketing, inventory management, and customer relationship tools. Their professor was so impressed that he connected them with a startup incubator program for the summer. That summer changed everything. Living on futons in a tiny Palo Alto apartment with 3 other student entrepreneurs, Brielle and Aiden refined Local Lift into a viable product. They secured their first 3 clients, a bookstore, a family-owned hardware store, and a boutique bakery, all struggling businesses that saw measurable growth within months of implementing their system. When junior year began, Brielle didn't return to her campus jobs. Instead, she and Aiden split their time between classes and growing their fledgling company renamed Main Street Revival. A small angel investment allowed them to hire 2 other students as part-time developers, and by the end of the academic year, they were serving 20 clients across Northern California. During this time, communication with her family dwindled to near silence. She sent occasional updates that went largely unacknowledged. When she excitedly emailed about securing their first investment, her mother replied with 2 sentences about a church fundraiser and a question about whether she was still studying that computer business thing. It was as if they were determined not to validate her path by showing interest. The final break came during her senior year. Main Street Revival was gaining traction, and a regional business journal had published a small profile on Brielle and Aiden as promising young entrepreneurs. Brielle had mailed a copy home, a peace offering of sorts, hoping her parents might finally see the legitimacy of her choices. The response came not from her parents but from Todd, now a sophomore at State University. He called late one night, his voice hushed. "I thought you should know," he said awkwardly. "Mom tore up that article you sent. Dad said something about, when this tech bubble bursts, she'll learn her lesson. They've started telling people you're taking a break from college, like you dropped out." Brielle sat in stunned silence, the phone heavy in her hand. It wasn't just disapproval anymore, they were actively erasing her achievements, rewriting her story to fit their narrative of inevitable failure. "I'm sorry," Todd continued. "I tried to defend you, but they don't want to hear it. They're convinced you're going to crash and burn, and they don't want to be associated with it." After that call, Brielle made a decision. She would stop reaching out, stop sending updates, stop seeking the approval that would never come. She would channel all her energy into proving them wrong, not for reconciliation, but for vindication. Her family had become in the language of business. She now spoke fluently, a sunk cost, an investment that would never yield returns best written off and moved past. As graduation approached, she sent a formal invitation to the ceremony, more as final documentation of their choice than in real hope of attendance. When no response came, she wasn't surprised. On graduation day, she sat among classmates surrounded by proud families, her own row of seats conspicuously empty again. But this time the emptiness didn't crush her. She had Aiden beside her, a growing company before her, and a community of mentors and friends who valued exactly the qualities her family had rejected. As she crossed the stage to accept her diploma, Brielle made a silent vow: the next time the Montgomerys heard her name, it would be because she had achieved something too significant for them to dismiss or deny. Success, she decided, would be her ultimate response to their rejection. The years following Stanford were both exhilarating and brutal for Brielle. She and Aiden had opted to forego lucrative job offers from tech giants to focus full-time on Main Street Revival, a decision that meant trading financial security for complete ownership of their vision. They moved operations to a converted warehouse in Oakland, where rent was cheaper than Palo Alto, living on ramen and coffee, while pouring every dollar back into the business. Their apartment, a tiny studio above a noisy bodega, became command central during those early months. The bathroom doubled as a storage closet for promotional materials. Their bed transformed into a conference table during daytime meetings, and their refrigerator held more server equipment than food. They worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, sustained by the growing response from small businesses desperate for their solution. Main Street Revival's premise was simple but powerful, giving independent businesses the same technological advantages that corporate chains enjoyed. Their platform combined inventory management, customer relationship tools, targeted digital marketing, and data analytics into an affordable, user-friendly system. While tech giants focused on serving corporate clients, Brielle and Aiden concentrated exclusively on mom-and-pop operations, the bakeries, hardware stores, bookshops, and family restaurants that gave communities their character, but were increasingly squeezed by corporate competition. "We're not just selling software," Brielle would explain during their pitches. "We're preserving American small-town identity one business at a time." This mission resonated deeply with Brielle, though she rarely articulated why. Each family business they saved felt like a small victory against the mindset that had dismissed her ambitions, the belief that ordinary people from ordinary places couldn't create extraordinary things. The first year brought constant challenges. 3 months in a critical server crash erased a week's worth of client data, requiring Aiden to work 72 hours straight to recover and rebuild the system. When a prominent venture capital firm offered funding that would have solved their cash flow problems but demanded they pivot to serving larger corporate clients, Brielle refused, trusting her conviction that their niche was not just viable, but vital. When their first office space flooded during winter rains, destroying equipment they couldn't afford to replace, they moved operations to a 24-hour diner for 2 weeks, taking client calls in vinyl booths between orders of bottomless coffee. Through it all, Brielle maintained complete radio silence with her family. She had blocked their numbers after graduation, a self-protective measure that hardened into habit. Only Todd maintained contact through sporadic texts and the occasional video call, providing minimal updates about life in Millfield. From him she learned that her parents spoke of her rarely, and when they did, it was with a mixture of resignation and resentment. They had crafted a narrative that Brielle was finding herself in California, a euphemism suggesting aimlessness rather than purposeful ambition. "They still have this idea you'll fail and come home," Todd told her during a rare call on her birthday. "Dad says the recession will flush out all those tech fantasies and you'll finally come back to reality." Brielle had laughed, a sharp sound without humor. The irony was bitter. While her parents waited for economic downturns to deliver their daughter back to practicality, Main Street Revival was actually thriving precisely because of market instability. When times got tough, small businesses needed their services more than ever to compete efficiently and survive on tighter margins. The breakthrough came 18 months after graduation. A regional chain of hardware stores in the Midwest, family-owned for 3 generations and struggling against big-box competition, implemented Main Street Revival's system across their 12 locations. Within 2 quarters, they reported a 34% increase in sales, inventory costs down by 22%, and customer retention improved dramatically. The owner, a gruff septuagenarian who reminded Brielle somewhat of her father, became their most vocal advocate, connecting them with a network of independent retailers across the Rust Belt. This success attracted attention from Small Business Quarterly, which featured Main Street Revival in a cover story titled, "Digital David vs. Goliath: How 2 Stanford Grads Are Empowering Main Street America." The article included Brielle's portrait and a detailed profile of her journey from a small Ohio manufacturing town to the cutting edge of retail technology. It discussed her vision of revitalizing the same kinds of communities she'd grown up in, though it made no mention of her estrangement from her own family. The story was picked up by several larger publications, bringing a flood of new clients and finally interested investors who respected their commitment to serving small businesses. Among those new clients was Hendrick's Hardware in Millfield, Ohio, the very store where Brielle had bought supplies for her childhood enterprises. She discovered this not through any family connection but from their automated client intake system. Seeing her hometown appear in their client database sent a jolt through Brielle, a sudden collision of past and present that left her momentarily breathless. She assigned another account manager to handle the Hendricks account, unable to face the inevitable questions about her family that would arise if she managed it personally. Still, she monitored their progress closely, taking quiet satisfaction as the store's metrics improved month over month. It was a strange feeling revitalizing a business in the very town where she'd been told her ambitions were unrealistic. By the 3-year mark, post-graduation Main Street Revival had grown to a team of 28 employees, serving over 500 businesses nationwide. They had moved to proper offices in Oakland's revitalized warehouse district, raised a modest funding round on favorable terms, and begun developing specialized versions of their platform for different retail sectors. Brielle, once dismissed as a dreamer, now led quarterly planning sessions for a company valued at $12 million. Life had settled into a demanding but fulfilling rhythm. Brielle and Aiden had upgraded to a 1-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood, occasionally treated themselves to restaurants that didn't serve food in plastic baskets, and had recently adopted a rescue dog they named Venture. While hardly luxurious, their existence had stabilized into something that even her practical parents might have recognized as success. Yet despite these achievements, Brielle had never posted about her professional life on social media. She maintained minimal personal accounts used primarily to keep in touch with college friends but never shared company milestones or press mentions. This wasn't modesty but self-preservation, a reluctance to create any channel through which her family might observe and judge her life from afar. Her success was private, protected from the people who had once predicted her failure with such certainty. That policy of separation was about to be shattered, however, by a single post that would breach the carefully maintained walls between her past and present, and force a reckoning that neither Brielle nor her estranged family were prepared to face. The tipping point came on an ordinary Tuesday in March, almost 4 years after Brielle's graduation from Stanford. Main Street Revival had just closed a significant Series A funding round, $15 million, at a $50 million valuation, a milestone that transformed their bootstrapped operation into a legitimate contender in the business technology space. The investment wasn't just capital. It was validation of everything Brielle and Aiden had sacrificed for proof that their focus on empowering small businesses wasn't just idealism but a viable market strategy. The company had gathered at their Oakland headquarters for a modest celebration. Champagne in paper cups, catered sandwiches from the deli downstairs, and an impromptu speech from Brielle, thanking their now 35 employees for believing in their mission. The atmosphere was electric, with possibility the kind of moment when dreams crystallize into tangible reality. As the celebration wound down, Aiden had casually snapped a photo of Brielle standing before their team, champagne raised in toast, the Oakland skyline visible through the windows behind her. Her face glowed with accomplishment, confidence radiating from every feature. She looked nothing like the uncertain girl who had once left Millfield with second-hand luggage and a folder of scholarship papers. "This needs to go on Instagram," Aiden insisted, showing her the photo. "People should see what determination looks like." When Brielle hesitated, he added, "You've been hiding your light, Brie. It's time to own what you've built." Perhaps it was the champagne, or the validation of the funding round, or simply the accumulated weight of 4 years proving her parents wrong. But Brielle agreed. For the first time, she allowed herself to publicly acknowledge her success. Aiden posted the image to the company account with a simple caption, "Main Street Revival closes $15 million Series A at $50 million valuation. Proud of our CEO at Brielle M. and our mission to empower independent businesses across America." Number startup success, number women in tech, number small business revolution. The post gained immediate traction in tech circles. TechCrunch picked up the story, highlighting the company's unique focus on small-town America. Business Insider included Brielle in a feature on 30 under 30 entrepreneurs transforming retail. Within hours, Brielle's personal social accounts dormant for years were flooded with connection requests and congratulatory messages. Among those messages was one that stopped her cold. A LinkedIn request from Todd Montgomery followed immediately by a text message. Mom and Dad saw the posts. All hell is breaking loose in Millfield. Brielle's hands trembled as she called her brother, stepping into a conference room for privacy. Todd answered immediately. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tight. "Mr. Hendricks from the hardware store came into Dad's poker game, waving his tablet around," Todd explained. "Said he had to show everyone the local girl made good story about how you're saving businesses like his. Pulled up those articles and the Instagram post. Called you a hometown hero." Todd paused. Dad just sat there white as a sheet. Everyone was asking him why he'd never mentioned his daughter was some big-shot CEO in California. Brielle closed her eyes, visualizing the scene her father, who had dismissed her ambitions as fantasy, confronted with indisputable evidence of her success in front of his peers. The public nature of the revelation would have been excruciating for a man who valued his reputation for practical wisdom. "Mom's been crying since they got home," Todd continued. "Not sad crying, angry crying. Keep saying you deliberately humiliated them, made them look like fools who didn't support their own daughter. They had no idea, Brie. No clue that Main Street Revival was yours, even though it's literally running the systems at Hendricks where they shop weekly." A complex emotion coiled in Brielle's chest, not quite satisfaction, not quite grief, but something in between. They never asked Todd. They never once asked what I was actually doing all these years. "I know," he sighed. "But now they want to talk. They've called me 6 times asking for your number." "Why now?" Brielle's voice hardened. "Because I'm successful, because people they know are impressed. Where were they when I was eating ramen for every meal and storing server equipment in my shower?" "It's complicated," Todd hedged. "I think they're ashamed. And maybe realizing they were wrong." "Shame isn't reconciliation," Brielle replied. "Recognition isn't an apology." After hanging up, Brielle sat alone in the conference room, staring at her phone as notifications continued to pour in. Among them now were messages from Millfield contacts she hadn't spoken to in years, her high school business teacher, former neighbors, even her mother's cousin, all expressing pride and congratulations. Her private success had become public knowledge in the very community that had once dismissed her ambitions. The next morning brought a more direct confrontation, an email from her father, the first direct communication in nearly 4 years. The message was brief, almost clinical. "Brielle, we've just learned about your company and its recent financing. It appears we may have been mistaken about the viability of your career path. We would appreciate a conversation at your convenience." Dad. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of the years of silence. Just a bloodless admission that we may have been mistaken, as if they were discussing a misjudged weather forecast, rather than years of rejected communication and actively undermining her achievements to friends and family. Brielle felt a surge of anger so intense it left her lightheaded. After everything, this was what they offered, not an apology, but a grudging concession that she hadn't failed as predicted. The message reduced their complex estrangement to a simple disagreement about career viability, ignoring the deeper wounds of conditional love and unsupportive judgment. She drafted and deleted a dozen responses, each more scathing than the last. In the end, she sent nothing, unable to find words that adequately expressed the depth of her hurt without reopening wounds she'd worked hard to heal. Instead, she channeled her emotional turmoil into work, diving into the expansion plans their new funding would support. During a planning session that afternoon, she proposed targeting the next phase of growth, specifically toward struggling retail districts in Rust Belt towns, like Millfield communities, where traditional businesses were being hollowed out by economic change. We started this company to prove that small-town America still matters in the digital economy, she told her team, her voice steady despite the personal storm raging beneath her professional demeanor. Let's double down on that mission. That evening, as she returned to her apartment, her phone buzzed with a notification she hadn't expected: a friend request from her mother on Instagram, followed immediately by one from her father. The digital overture felt simultaneously significant and inadequate, an attempt to bridge a chasm with a gesture that required nothing more than a tap of a finger. What truly broke her, though, was what she discovered when curiosity led her to view her mother's profile. There, in Eleanor Montgomery's sparse collection of photos, was a recently uploaded image: Brielle's Stanford graduation announcement, the same one they had ignored 4 years earlier, now proudly displayed with the caption, "Throwback to our daughter's graduation from Stanford Business School. So proud of all she's accomplishing in California. Number proud mom, number Stanford, number my daughter." The blatant revisionism claiming pride in an achievement they had actively rejected sent Brielle into a rage she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. They hadn't just ignored her success, they were now attempting to co-opt it, rewriting history to cast themselves as supportive parents who had championed her journey rather than attempted to prevent it. With hands shaking, Brielle finally responded to her father's email. "Dad, I see that you and Mom have suddenly discovered an interest in my career, now that it's been validated by money and public recognition. I also notice that Mom is now claiming on social media to have been proud of my Stanford graduation, the same graduation both of you refused to attend, and the achievement you've spent years actively hiding from your friends. I didn't build Main Street Revival to prove you wrong, or to earn your retroactive approval. I built it because I believed in it, even when, especially when, no one from my own family did. If you want to have a conversation, it needs to start with an acknowledgement of the actual history between us, not the convenient version you're now constructing. I won't participate in a narrative that erases the reality of your choices or mine." Brielle, she hit send before she could reconsider, then turned off her phone entirely, unable to bear whatever response might come. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry for the family support she had never had, and for the realization that even now, with all her success, what her parents valued was not her achievement but how it reflected on them. The next morning she woke to multiple missed calls from her parents, and a text from Todd. "They're talking about coming to Oakland. I think you broke them, Brie." Brielle stared at the message, a cold dread settling in her stomach. After years of separation, her carefully constructed boundaries were crumbling. The professional triumph that should have been her moment of pure celebration had become entangled with family trauma she had never fully resolved. The past she had worked so hard to outrun was finally catching up, demanding a reckoning she wasn't sure she was ready to face. And yet, there was a part of her, the stubborn, determined part that had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing, that recognized this confrontation was perhaps inevitable. Maybe it was time to face the Montgomerys not as the disappointed daughter seeking approval, but as the successful woman who had proven her own worth beyond any doubt. With that thought, Brielle texted back a single line to her brother: "Tell them I'll meet them, but on my terms, not theirs." Hey guys, I can feel the tension building in this story, right? The moment when success forces a confrontation with the past can be so powerful. If you're enjoying this family drama journey, take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I read every comment, so let me know if you've ever had your success doubted by family members who later changed their tune. Now let's see what happens when Brielle's parents finally come face to face with a daughter whose dreams they dismissed. The week after her response to her father's email felt interminable to Brielle. She threw herself into work with a frantic energy that concerned even Aiden, staying at the office until midnight most nights, scheduling back-to-back meetings that left no time for reflection. It was the same coping mechanism she had developed at Stanford, when emotions threatened to overwhelm, bury them under avalanches of productivity. Her parents had responded to her email with a brief message agreeing to her terms. They would meet in Oakland, at a time of her choosing with no preset expectations. They were staying with her mother's cousin in Sacramento, and could drive to the Bay Area whenever Brielle was ready. The ball was in her court, which should have felt empowering, but instead, left her paralyzed with indecision. "You can't avoid this forever," Aiden told her gently on Friday evening, finding her still hunched over quarterly projections long after everyone else had left. "The meeting you're dreading is also the meeting that might finally let you move forward." Brielle sighed, rubbing her eyes. "I've moved forward just fine without them." "Have you?" Aiden challenged, his voice soft but insistent. "You've built an incredible company that helps family businesses across the country, but you flinch every time someone asks about your own family. That doesn't sound like moving forward to me." His words stung, because they contained a truth she had been avoiding. Her success, impressive as it was, had been built partially as a response to rejection. How much of her drive came from genuine passion, and how much from the need to prove her parents wrong? It was a question she had never allowed herself to examine too closely. The next morning, Brielle finally texted her brother with details for the meeting Sunday afternoon at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near Lake Merritt that offered enough privacy for a difficult conversation without the pressure of being in her home or office. Todd replied immediately that their parents had agreed and would be there. Sunday arrived with merciless swiftness. Brielle, dressed with deliberate care, a simple but elegant navy dress, and the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her for high school graduation. Professional, but not intimidating. Put together, but not trying too hard. Every choice calculated to project the confident, successful woman she had become, while still leaving room for whatever emotional storm might be coming. She arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a view of the entrance. Her heart pounded so loudly, she was certain other patrons must hear it. When the door opened at precisely 2 p.m., revealing her parents for the first time in nearly 4 years, the sight was both familiar and jarring. They had aged. Her father's hair had gone completely gray, his shoulders slightly stooped in a way she didn't remember. Her mother seemed smaller somehow, her once meticulously maintained appearance now showing signs of hasty assembly, lipstick slightly crooked, a button misaligned on her cardigan. They stood in the doorway, scanning the room with anxious expressions, until their eyes found their daughter. The moment stretched awkward and electric before Brielle raised a hand in minimal acknowledgement. They approached the table with visible trepidation, as if crossing a minefield. "Brielle," her mother said, voice catching. "You look." She stopped, seemingly unsure how to complete the sentence. Beautiful, successful, different, all were true but insufficient. "Hello, Mom, Dad." Brielle kept her voice steady, gesturing to the chairs across from her. "Please sit." They settled uncomfortably, an air of displacement surrounding them. These people, who had always seemed so competent and assured in their own environment, now appeared lost fish out of water in the trendy Oakland cafe with its exposed brick and artisanal menu. "Your office is nearby?" her father asked, an attempt at neutral conversation. "About 10 blocks north," Brielle answered. "In the warehouse district." Silence descended again, heavy with unspoken accusations and explanations. Finally, her mother broke. "We saw the articles about your company," she said, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. "Richard from the hardware store can't stop talking about how you've saved his business. Says he didn't even realize it was you until he saw your picture in that magazine." Brielle nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Main Street Revival has helped over 700 independent businesses now. Mr. Hendricks was one of our earlier clients." 700. Her father looked genuinely startled. The articles only mentioned 500. Those articles are from 6 months ago, Brielle explained. We've grown significantly since then. Another silence, this one tinged with a new awareness. They were only now beginning to grasp the scale of what their daughter had built, not some small startup struggling for relevance, but a rapidly expanding enterprise, making real impact. Why didn't you tell us? Her mother finally asked the question, bursting forth, as if she could no longer contain it. All this success, this achievement. Why keep it secret from your own family? The question ignited something in Brielle, a slow-burning anger she had suppressed for years. Tell you, she repeated, her voice low but intense. I tried to tell you. For years I tried. I sent emails about our first investors, our first major clients. I mailed articles when we were featured in business publications. I even called on holidays trying to share milestones. Each time you changed the subject, or responded with warnings about the tech bubble, or simply ignored it. Her father shifted uncomfortably. We were concerned. You were waiting for me to fail. Brielle interrupted, her voice rising despite her best efforts to maintain composure. You weren't concerned about me, you were concerned about being right. Every communication was just checking to see if I'd given up yet, if I'd finally admitted you were right about my unrealistic dreams. And when I didn't fail, when I actually succeeded, you couldn't even acknowledge it. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair, Brielle. We were worried about you being hurt, being disappointed. No. Brielle shook her head firmly. If that were true, you would have been there to support me through the hard times. You would have asked about my struggles, offered encouragement. Instead, you told people I had taken a break from college when I was actually graduating with honors. You pretended my achievements didn't exist because they didn't fit your narrative. Her father's face flushed. We didn't understand this world you entered. Silicon Valley startups, it all seemed like gambling to us. Risking your future on some digital pipe dream. You didn't try to understand, Brielle countered. You decided I was wrong before I even began. And now that other people are impressed, now that there's money and press and status attached to what I've built, suddenly you're interested. Suddenly, Mom is posting my Stanford graduation on Instagram, as if you were ever supportive of my going there. At this, her mother had the grace to look ashamed. I shouldn't have done that, she admitted quietly. It was dishonest. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. The wounds were too deep, the history too painful for simple reconciliation. Brielle took a deep breath, trying to center herself. Why are you really here? She finally asked. What do you want from me now? Her parents exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Her father cleared his throat. We want to know you again, he said, the words seemingly difficult for him. We've missed 4 years of your life. Important years. We'd like to stop missing more. On what terms? Brielle challenged. As the successful daughter you can finally be proud of, or as the actual person I am, dreams and ambitions included. We're trying to understand that person, her mother said softly. We didn't before. That was our mistake. Brielle studied them, searching for sincerity, for any sign this wasn't just about saving face in Millfield, now that their daughter's success had become public knowledge. What she saw was complicated, genuine regret mixed with lingering incomprehension, pride tangled with defensiveness. I'm not the same person who left Millfield, she said finally. I can't be the daughter you expected me to be. I won't pretend that what happened didn't hurt me deeply, and I won't accept any relationship based on revising history or conditional approval. We don't expect you to be the same, her father said, surprising her with his directness. We're not the same either. Seeing what you've built. It's challenged everything we thought we knew. About success? About security? About you. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was perhaps the closest her father had ever come to admitting he was wrong. Brielle felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness exactly, but the first crack in a wall she had built around her heart. "I can't promise anything," she said carefully, "but I'm willing to try. Something. Small steps. A dinner maybe. A real conversation about what I actually do and why it matters to me. No pretending the past didn't happen, but maybe finding a way forward." Relief washed over her parents' faces, not the total reconciliation they might have hoped for, but an opening where before there had been only silence. As they tentatively began discussing logistics for a dinner later that week, Brielle felt a strange mix of emotions: wariness, hope, residual anger, and underneath it all, a thin thread of something that might someday become healing. The conversation that followed was awkward but real, her first honest exchange with her parents in years. They asked questions about her company that showed they had actually read the articles about Main Street Revival, though they still struggled to grasp the technical aspects of the business. She learned that her father had recently retired, that her mother was considering the same, that their world in Millfield had continued in its steady, predictable rhythm, while hers had transformed completely. As they prepared to leave, her mother hesitantly asked if she might see Brielle's office sometime. The request was small but significant, an acknowledgement of Brielle's reality, an expression of interest in the world she had built. Brielle found herself nodding a tentative yes to what might be the first of many small steps toward rebuilding what had been broken. Walking back to her apartment afterward, Brielle felt lighter somehow, as if a burden she had carried for years had shifted slightly, not disappeared, but redistributed in a way that made it more bearable. The road ahead with her parents would not be easy, would certainly include setbacks and difficult conversations. But for the first time in years, a road existed at all. That evening she called Aidan to update him on the meeting. It wasn't a disaster, she concluded. Not quite a success either, but a beginning maybe. "Beginnings are underrated," he replied warmly. "They're where all the good stories start." Later, as she prepared for bed, Brielle found herself thinking about Main Street Revival's mission to help small businesses adapt and survive in changing times without losing their essential character. Perhaps families weren't so different. Perhaps they too could evolve without erasing their history, could find new ways to connect while acknowledging past hurts. It was, she thought, as she drifted toward sleep, a hypothesis worth testing. The months following that first tentative reunion unfolded in a careful dance of boundaries and bridge building. Brielle had established clear parameters for reconnection: transparency about the past, respect for her accomplishments, and acknowledgement of the pain caused by their rejection. Her parents, initially awkward in this new dynamic, gradually came to accept these terms, not always gracefully, but with increasing sincerity. Their first dinner, held at a restaurant near Brielle's office, had been stilted but cordial. Her parents had toured Main Street Revival's headquarters beforehand, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine awe as they witnessed the scale of the operation. 35 employees working in a buzzing open office, walls covered with maps showing client locations across the country, conference rooms named after famous small towns in America. "This is all yours?" her father had asked, struggling to reconcile this professional environment with the daughter he had once dismissed. "Aidan and I built it together," Brielle had corrected him. "But yes, I'm the CEO. This is what throwing my life away looks like." The comment had stung as intended, but her father had simply nodded, accepting the rebuke as earned. Small steps followed. Monthly video calls replaced years of silence. Her mother attended a women's entrepreneurship conference in San Francisco, where Brielle was speaking, sitting in the back row with an expression balanced between pride and discomfort, as her daughter confidently addressed a room of investors and business leaders. Progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks: her father's reflexive criticism of a risky new feature. Main Street Revival was developing. Her mother's passive-aggressive comments about Brielle's demanding schedule making family connections difficult. Old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, requiring Brielle to establish boundaries with a firmness that sometimes left all parties shaken. "I'm not asking for your approval anymore," she had told her father bluntly during one tense phone call. "I'm asking for your respect. There's a difference." The statement had ended the call prematurely but had provoked a thoughtful email from him, days later, an unprecedented acknowledgement that he was still learning how to support her on her terms, not his. 6 months after that first cafe meeting, an unexpected opportunity for deeper healing emerged. Main Street Revival was launching a new initiative focused specifically on manufacturing towns affected by plant closures and outsourcing communities exactly like Millfield. The project would provide specialized support to help these towns develop diversified business ecosystems that could withstand economic shifts. Brielle had hesitated before making the call, unsure if this professional intersection with her personal history was wise. But something in her had shifted over the months of cautious reconnection. "Dad," she had said when he answered, "I need your perspective on something. We're developing a program for towns like Millfield, and I could use your experience. You understand that community in ways I never will." The silence on the other end had stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. When her father finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You want my input on your business, on this specific aspect?" "Yes," Brielle had clarified. "You worked at the plant for 30 years. You've seen the economic changes firsthand. That knowledge has value." What had followed was their first truly collaborative conversation, her father offering insights into the practical challenges facing Millfield's businesses, Brielle explaining how Main Street Revival's tools could address the specific pain points. For the first time, they were meeting as adults with different but complementary expertise, rather than as parent and child locked in a battle over whose vision was correct. That conversation had led to others. Her father had connected her with former colleagues who now ran small businesses in Millfield. Her mother had arranged a meeting with the town's Chamber of Commerce when Brielle visited during the summer. The Manufacturing Town initiative had become unexpectedly a shared project that allowed them to build a new relationship atop the rubble of the old one. Meanwhile, Main Street Revival continued its meteoric growth. Their client base passed the 1,000 mark. They opened a second office in Chicago to better serve their expanding Midwest market. Aiden led the development of industry-specific versions of their platform, starting with tools tailored for independent bookstores fighting against online giants. As the company flourished, Brielle found herself increasingly comfortable sharing both challenges and triumphs with her parents, not seeking approval but simply including them in her reality. Their responses evolved as well, her father offering practical suggestions when appropriate, her mother expressing genuine concern during difficult periods without the undertone of "I told you so" that had once characterized her worries. The true test came when Main Street Revival faced its first major crisis. A serious security breach had exposed client data, sending the company into emergency response mode for weeks. As the team worked around the clock to contain the damage and support affected clients, Brielle had called her parents in a rare moment of vulnerability. "Everything we've built could collapse if we don't handle this perfectly," she'd admitted, exhaustion evident in her voice. Rather than seizing the opportunity to question her path, her father had responded with unexpected wisdom. "Every business faces crises. It's not the crisis that defines you, it's how you respond to it." Her mother had added, "What do you need? Can we help in any way?" The offers weren't particularly useful in practical terms. What could a retired factory manager and elementary school teacher contribute to a data security crisis? But the simple act of support without judgment represented a seismic shift in their relationship. When the crisis finally passed, with Main Street Revival's reputation ultimately enhanced by their transparent handling of the breach, Brielle had called them again. "We made it through," she reported. "You were right, Dad." How we responded mattered more than the problem itself. His quiet, "I'm proud of you," Brielle had meant more than any professional accolade. By the one-year anniversary of their reunion, something resembling a healthy family relationship had taken root. Not the unconditional closeness some families enjoyed, not without its scars and sensitive areas, but a relationship based on mutual respect that acknowledged both past hurts and present realities. The final symbolic healing came when Main Street Revival was featured in the Wall Street Journal, a full-page profile focusing on how the company was revitalizing forgotten economic corridors across America. The reporter had interviewed both Brielle and her parents, capturing the story of their estrangement and tentative reconciliation alongside the company's business success. When the article appeared, Brielle had worried it exposed too much of her personal history. But the response had surprised her: hundreds of messages from entrepreneurs who had faced similar family rejection when pursuing unconventional paths, who found hope in the possibility of eventual understanding. One message in particular had stood out, an email from a 19-year-old in a small Minnesota town. "My parents think I'm crazy for wanting to start a business instead of taking over the family farm. Your story made me believe that someday they might understand, even if they don't right now." Brielle had forwarded that message to her parents with a simple note: "This is why sharing our story matters." Her mother's response had come quickly: "I wish we could tell that young person's parents what we've learned, that sometimes the dreams that seem most frightening are the ones most worth supporting." It wasn't a perfect ending. The scars of those 4 years of estrangement would never completely fade. Conversations could still grow tense when they ventured into sensitive territory. Her parents' understanding of her world remained limited by their different experiences and perspectives. But as Brielle reflected on the journey from the empty seats at her graduation to her father proudly showing clients around the Oakland office, she recognized that they had all been changed by this process. Her parents had expanded their definition of success beyond the borders of Millfield. And Brielle had learned that true independence wasn't about escaping her origins but integrating them into the person she had become, the parts that strengthened her as well as the parts that had hurt her. Main Street Revival's mission statement, displayed prominently in their office lobby, had taken on new personal significance for Brielle: building bridges between tradition and innovation, preserving what matters while embracing necessary change. It was, she had come to realize, a philosophy that applied to families as well as businesses. 5 years after that pivotal Instagram post, Brielle stood backstage at a regional entrepreneurship conference in Columbus, Ohio, just 90 minutes from her hometown. As the featured keynote speaker, she was about to address an audience of 500, including a delegation from Millfield High School's business program. Among them would be students using a curriculum she had helped develop and fund, created specifically to nurture entrepreneurial thinking in small-town teenagers. Through the curtain, she could see her parents seated in the front row. Not just present, but early, eager, and visibly proud. Her father wore a Main Street Revival polo shirt, a detail that would have been unimaginable years earlier. Her mother clutched a program featuring Brielle's photo and biography, occasionally pointing out details to neighboring attendees with unmistakable maternal pride. Main Street Revival had grown beyond even Brielle's ambitious visions, now a publicly traded company valued at over $300 million, serving more than 15,000 independent businesses nationwide. Their Manufacturing Town initiative, inspired by those early conversations with her father, had become a cornerstone of their business, and a model studied by economic development experts. As Brielle prepared to take the stage, she reflected on the long, complicated journey that had brought her here, not just the professional achievements, but the personal healing that had allowed her to integrate her past and present into a coherent whole. The rift with her family, once a source of such pain, had ultimately taught all of them about resilience, adaptation, and the possibility of growth, even after profound disconnection. When the host announced her name, Brielle stepped into the spotlight to enthusiastic applause, catching her parents' eyes as she took her place at the podium. Their smiles, genuine, supportive, and free from the skepticism that had once defined their relationship, told her everything she needed to know about how far they had all come. Some dreams, she had learned, take longer than others to be understood. But the validation that matters most comes not from proving others wrong, but from creating something that ultimately brings understanding, where there was once only fear and judgment. What a journey it's been sharing this story with you all. If you connected with Brielle's struggle for acceptance and her ultimate triumph, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about family, dynamics, personal growth, and sweet karma. Have you ever had to prove yourself to skeptical family members, or experienced that moment when someone who doubted you finally had to acknowledge your success? Share your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, sometimes the people who don't believe in your dreams are the ones who need to see them come true the most. See you in the next video.